The storm howled, waves crashing against Elias's weather cabin. He stood frozen, clutching a sodden canvas, its painted face staring back, a ghost from years gone by. His hands trembled as lightning tore the sky. On the floor, Lena lay unconscious, her soaked clothes clinging to her frame. A tattoo on her wrist gleamed, a symbol he hadn't seen in a decade. "How could you paint this?" he whispered, voice cracking. Her shallow breaths filled the silence. Why this face? What tied them to his past? But before we continue, let's go back to how it all began. The sea roared like a beast unleashed, its claws of foam slashing at Elias's small fishing boat. Rain stung his face, each drop a needle against his weathered skin. He gripped the helm, his knuckles white, as the storm churned the Atlantic into a cauldron of chaos. At 35, Elias Kane was no stranger to the ocean's wrath, but tonight felt different, vindictive, almost personal. His oilskin coat flapped wildly, and his dark hair, streaked with premature gray, plastered to his forehead. The lighthouse beams swept across the horizon, a fleeting guide through the tempest. He shouldn't be out here. No sane fisherman would. But the distress flare he'd seen an hour ago, a crimson streak against the black sky, had pulled him from his solitude like a hook in his gut. Who's out there? The thought gnawed at him, sharp and insistent. His cabin on the cliffs of Havenport, a small New England town where lobster traps outnumbered people, was a fortress against the world. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to anyone in months, not since the whispers about his wife's accident stopped following him like shadows. The townsfolk respected his silence, or maybe they feared it. Either way, he preferred the sea's company, until tonight, when it turned traitor. The flare's origin was close now, maybe half a mile off. Elias squinted through the spray, his hazel eyes catching a glint of wreckage. A small sailboat, its mast snapped like a twig, bobbed helplessly in the waves. His heart thudded, a dull ache spreading through his chest. Someone's alive. Or was? He adjusted the throttle, the engine groaning against the storm's resistance. His boat lurched, and for a moment, he wondered if he'd join the wreck below. Then he saw her. A figure clung to the sailboat's hull, arms wrapped around a jagged plank. Her hair, dark and tangled, whipped in the wind, and her face, pale, almost ghostly, flashed in the lighthouse's beam. She was young, maybe late 20s, and her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto his. Elias's breath caught. He hadn't looked into another person's eyes in years, not like this. Her lips moved, but the storm swallowed her words. "Move, damn it." He shook off the paralysis, his hands fumbling for the rope coiled at his feet. "Hey," he shouted, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "Hold on." The woman's grip slipped, her body sliding toward the water. Elias cursed under his breath. Not a curse, not really, just a mess of frustration and fear. He tied the rope to his waist, his fingers clumsy in the cold, and leaned over the side. The waves slapped at him, hungry, but he stretched further, his arm burning with the effort. "Don't let go." His mind screamed it, to her, to himself. Her hand grazed his, slick and freezing. He grabbed her wrist, pulling with everything he had. She was light, almost too light, like the sea had already claimed half of her. With a grunt, he hauled her aboard, her body collapsing against the deck. She coughed, seawater spilling from her lips, and her eyes fluttered shut. Elias knelt beside her, his pulse racing. She's alive. But for how long? Her clothes, a thin jacket and jeans, were soaked, and her skin was clammy, almost blue. He needed to get her to shore, to warmth. Then he saw it. Floating in the wreckage, tethered by a frayed cord, was a canvas, its edges curling in the waves. A painting. The woman's arm twitched, as if reaching for it, even in her daze. Elias hesitated. It's just a painting. But something about it, its weight in the water, the way she clung to it, felt wrong. Heavy. His flaw, the one he buried beneath years of solitude, reared up. Fear of secrets, of truths he couldn't face. He'd lost Clara, his wife, to a truth he hadn't wanted to see. Not again. He turned away, focusing on the woman. The painting could wait. He steered for shore, the engine sputtering as the storm fought him every inch. The woman stirred, muttering something he couldn't catch. Her face, sharp and delicate, was etched with exhaustion, but there was a fierceness there too, like she'd clawed her way through hell to survive. "Who are you?" He didn't ask it aloud. He wasn't ready for answers. Havenport's docks came into view, the wooden piers swaying under the storm's assault. Elias tied the boat with shaking hands, his mind racing. The woman needed shelter, heat, maybe a doctor. His cabin was closer than town, and the thought of facing curious eyes at the hospital made his stomach twist. He lifted her, her weight slight but awkward, and carried her up the rocky path to his home. The wind howled, mocking his every step. Inside, the cabin was a cocoon of wood and shadow, lit by a single oil lamp. Elias laid her on the couch, draping a wool blanket over her. Her breathing steadied, but she didn't wake. He stoked the fire, the crackle of logs a small rebellion against the storm's roar. His hands itched to check on her, to do something, but he forced himself to sit. She'll be fine. He wasn't sure he believed it. His eyes drifted to the door. The painting. He'd left it on the boat, hadn't he? But no. There was propped against the wall, dripping seawater onto the floor. He didn't remember bringing it in. A chill ran through him, not from the cold. Why does it matter so much? He approached it, his boots heavy on the creaking boards. The canvas was wrapped in plastic, but the edges peeked out, hinting at colors, blues, grays, a flash of red. He reached for it, then stopped. Not now. His fear, that old coward, whispered, "Some truths are better left buried." A groan from the couch snapped him back. The woman, Lena, he'd later learn, stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were green, sharp, like sea glass polished by the tide. Where? Her voice was faint, cracked. She tried to sit up, then winced, clutching her side. "Easy," Elias said, crossing to her. "You're safe. Storm got you good." He kept his tone light, a habit from years of deflecting pain with humor. "Name's Elias. You got one." "Lena," she rasped, her gaze darting around the room. It lingered on the painting, and her face tightened. Fear or something deeper. "My canvas, you saved it." He nodded, uneasy. Yeah, seemed important. Too important. He didn't say that part. Her relief was palpable, but it didn't reach her eyes. They held secrets, just like the painting. "You're a fisherman?" she asked, her voice steadier now. She was studying him, taking in his rough hands, the salt-stained coat hanging by the door. "Something like that." He smirked, but felt forced. "You're an artist, I'm guessing?" "Not exactly yachting weather out there." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Got caught in it. Stupid mistake." She looked away, her fingers tracing the blanket's edge. "She's hiding something." Elias's gut twisted, but he didn't press. Not yet. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the room. Lena's wrist caught the light, revealing a tattoo, a small anchor entwined with a rose. Elias froze. He knew that design. Clara had sketched it once, years ago before the accident. His throat tightened, and he turned away, pretending to adjust the fire. Coincidence. Has to be. But doubt gnawed at him, sharp as the storm's teeth. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Elias tensed. No one came up here, not in weather like this. He crossed to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A figure stood outside, hooded, their face obscured. The knock came again, harder, insistent. Lena's eyes widened, her body stiffening under the blanket. "Don't answer it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who's out there?" Elias's hand hovered over the doorknob, his pulse hammering. The painting loomed in the corner, its secrets heavier than ever. He glanced at Lena, her fear mirroring his own. Whatever was happening, it had just begun. The knock echoed again, sharp and demanding, cutting through the storm's wail. Elias's hand lingered on the doorknob, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. Lena's whisper, "Don't answer it," hung in the air, her green eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. He glanced at her, curled under the blanket, her face pale but fierce, like a cornered animal ready to bolt. Who's she running from? The thought clawed at him, but the hooded figure outside demanded his focus. He cracked the door just an inch, letting the wind howl in. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough, barely masking the tremor. "Elias, it's Amos." The voice was gruff, familiar, but edged with urgency. Amos Tate, Havenport's grizzled harbor master, pushed back his hood, revealing a face weathered by decades at sea. His gray beard glistened with rain, and his eyes darted past Elias, scanning the cabin. "Saw your boat come in. You all right?" Elias relaxed, but only slightly. Amos was a fixture in town, a man who knew every knot and tide, but his sudden appearance felt wrong. "Fine," Elias said, keeping the door narrow. "Storm's a mess. What got you out here?" Amos's gaze flicked to Lena, who'd pulled the blanket tighter, her knuckles white. "Heard a distress flare. Checking the docks. You pull someone in?" His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. They lingered on Lena, sharp and searching. "He knows something." Elias's gut twisted. He stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him, the cold biting through his sweater. "Yeah, a woman. Shipwrecked. She's resting." He kept it vague, watching Amos's face for tells. The older man's jaw tightened, almost imperceptible, but Elias caught it. "You didn't need to trek up here, Amos. Could have waited till morning." Amos shrugged, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Duty calls. You know how it is." He paused, rain dripping from his hood. That her painting inside looked valuable. Elias's blood ran cold. He hadn't mentioned the canvas. How'd he see it? The cabin's windows were small, fogged with condensation. "Just some art," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Probably worth more to her than anyone else." His mind raced, replaying the moment he'd brought the painting in. Had Amos been watching from the docks? The thought felt paranoid, but Havenport was small. Secrets didn't stay buried long. "Keep her safe, Elias," Amos said, his voice low, almost a warning. He clapped Elias's shoulder, then turned, disappearing into the storm shroud. Elias stood frozen, the rain soaking his hair, until the crunch of Amos's boots faded. What's he after? He didn't trust the harbor master, not tonight. Back inside, Lena was sitting up, her eyes locked on the door. "Who was that?" Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled, betraying her calm. "Amos. Runs the harbor." Elias crossed to the fire, tossing in a log to chase the chill. "He's nosy, but harmless." The lie tasted bitter. He didn't believe it, and from Lena's frown, neither did she. He wanted to ask about her fear about the painting, but her guarded expression stopped him. "Push too hard, and she'll clam up." Instead, he grabbed a mug from the shelf, filling it with coffee from a dented pot. "Here, warm up." She took it, her fingers brushing his cold as the sea. "Thanks," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the painting. It leaned against the wall, its plastic wrap glistening like a secret waiting to spill. Elias's fear, that old, gnawing dread of truths he couldn't face, flared again. He'd ignored the painting last night, a mistake he was starting to regret. It's not just art, but admitting that meant opening a door to his past, to Clara's accident, to questions he'd buried in silence. "You gonna tell me why that canvas matters so much?" he asked, keeping his tone light, almost teasing. "Or do I have to guess?" Lena's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "It's personal." She sipped the coffee, her eyes distant. "A piece of me, I guess. Losing it would be like losing a limb." He nodded, but her answer felt like a dodge. "Personal, sure, but why's Amos sniffing around?" He sat across from her, the fire's glow casting shadows on his face. "You're not from Havenport. Where'd you sail from?" Her smile faded. "Boston," she said too quickly. "Took a trip to clear my head. Storm caught me off guard." Her fingers traced the mug's rim, and Elias caught the lie in her paws. Boston was a day's sail, but her boat hadn't looked built for open water. And that tattoo, Clara's anchor and rose, kept tugging at him, a thread he couldn't pull without unraveling something bigger. Before he could press, she leaned forward, her voice soft but urgent. "Elias, why'd you save me? You could have stayed safe in this cabin. Why risk it?" The question hit like a wave. He looked away, his jaw tight. "Because I couldn't save her." Clara's face flashed in his mind, laughing, then still, too still, after the accident. He'd failed her, ignored the signs of her struggle, and the guilt had driven him to the sea last night. But he couldn't say that. Someone had to, he muttered, forcing a grin. Besides, I needed the exercise. Lena's laugh was soft, but her eyes saw through him. You're a terrible liar. She set the mug down, wincing as she shifted. You're not as alone as you think, Elias. Her words stung, and he stood abruptly, turning to the window. The storm had eased, leaving a restless drizzle. She doesn't know me, but her tattoo, her painting, her presence, they were cracks in his isolation, and he hated how they made him feel exposed. Get her to town. Let someone else deal with this. The thought was tempting, but Amos's visit had changed things. Havenport wasn't safe, not until he understood what was at stake. We need to move, he said, grabbing his coat. Storm's dying down. I'll take you to the lighthouse, better shelter, and I can call a doctor from there. The old lighthouse, a mile up the coast, was abandoned but sturdy, a place to think without prying eyes. Lena hesitated, then nodded. My painting comes with us. Her tone left no room for argument. They set out, Elias carrying the canvas under his arm, its weight heavier than it should be. The path to the lighthouse wound through rocky cliffs, the air thick with salt and damp earth. Lena limped beside him, her strength returning, but her silence heavy. The town's annual lobster festival was tomorrow, and distant preparations, banners flapping, boats docked, dotted the harbor below. Elias usually avoided the festival, its cheer a reminder of what he'd lost, but today it felt like a lifeline, a sign of normalcy. At the lighthouse, its white tower chipped and leaning, Elias pushed open the rusted door. The interior smelled of mildew, its spiral stairs cloaked in shadows. He set the painting against a wall, its plastic wrap crinkling. Lena sank onto a crate, her breath shallow. This place, it's like a ghost, she said, her voice echoing. Fits us then, Elias quipped, but his heart wasn't in it. He climbed to the lantern room, checking the radio. Static crackled, but no signal. Figures. When he returned, Lena was unwrapping the painting, her hands careful, almost reverent. The canvas revealed a face, Clara's face, unmistakable, her eyes hauntingly alive. Elias's breath stopped. How? You knew her, Lena said, not a question. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his, raw with something like guilt. Clara was my sister. The words hit like a punch. Elias staggered back, his mind reeling. Sister? Clara had never mentioned a sibling, but the tattoo, the painting, it all clicked, a puzzle he'd refused to see. His flaw, his fear of truth had blinded him again. You're lying, he snapped, denying the obvious, his voice shaking. She didn't tell you about me. Lena cut in, her voice breaking. I was gone. Trouble with the law. She cut ties to protect herself. She looked away, her fingers tracing the tattoo. I came to find you, Elias, to make things right. Before he could respond, a creak echoed from the stairs. Elias spun, his heart pounding. Amos stepped into the light, a boomstick glinting in his hand. Nice reunion, he said, his smile cold. Now, hand over the painting. Amos's boomstick gleamed in the dim lighthouse, its barrel steady, aimed at Elias's chest. The air felt thick, charged with the tang of rust and betrayal. Lena froze beside the painting, her hands still on the canvas, Clara's painted eyes staring out like a silent accusation. Elias's heart pounded, his mind scrambling for a way out. He's after the painting. Why? Amos's cold smile offered no answers, only menace. I said, hand it over, the harbor master repeated, his voice low, cutting through the creak of the lighthouse's ancient beams. Amos, put that thing down, Elias said, raising his hand slowly, his tone light despite the sweat beading on his neck. You're scaring the artist. He forced a grin, hoping humor might buy time, but his eyes flicked to Lena, urging her to stay calm. Her face was a mask of shock, but her fingers tightened on the painting, protective, defiant. Shut it, Elias, Amos snapped, stepping closer. His boots scuffed the dusty floor, and the boomstick wavered, just enough to show his nerves. You don't know what you're holding. That canvas, it's a map. Treasure, hidden off the coast. Clara found it, didn't she? And you? He jerked his head toward Lena. You finish her work. Elias's breath caught. A map? His mind flashed to Clara's late-night sketches, her cryptic talk of finding something big before the accident. He dismissed it as dreams, too wrapped in his own grief to listen. His fear of truth, that flaw he'd clung to, had blinded him then, and now it might cost them everything. He glanced at Lena, her eyes confirming Amos's words. She knew. The revelation stung, but there was no time to dwell. Amos, you're chasing ghosts, Elias said, stepping forward, hands still raised. Let's talk this out. No need for. His words cut off as Amos swung the boomstick toward Lena, his finger twitching on the trigger. Move, and she's done, Amos growled. Lena flinched, but her gaze held steady, green eyes blazing with a resilience that reminded Elias of Clara. She's not giving up. Neither could he. The lighthouse groaned under a gust of wind, its walls trembling. Elias seized the moment, lunging for Amos's arm. The boomstick fired, a deafening crack, and pain seared Elias's shoulder as he tackled the older man to the ground. The gun skidded across the floor, disappearing into the shadows. Amos roared, his fists swinging, but Elias was younger, stronger, driven by a fire he hadn't felt in years. He pinned Amos, his knee on the man's chest, blood dripping from his shoulder onto the floor. Lena, get the gun, Elias shouted, his voice raw. She scrambled, her limping gait slowing her, but she dove for the shadows, her hands searching. Amos bucked beneath him, his face twisted with desperation. You don't understand, he gasped. They'll ruin me. The debts, the cartel, they'll take everything. Elias hesitated, his grip loosening. Debts? Cartel? Amos wasn't just greedy. He was trapped, a man drowning in his own mistakes. For a moment, Elias saw himself, isolated, haunted, running from truth. But Lena's voice snapped him back. Got it. She stood, the boomstick shaking in her hands, aimed at Amos. Her face was pale, but her resolve was iron. Stay down, she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her arms. Amos slumped, defeated, his eyes darting between them. Elias stood, wincing as pain flared in his shoulder. Blood soaked his sweater, but the wound was shallow, a graze. Lucky. He tied Amos's wrists with a rope from the crate, his movements quick despite the ache. We need to get out of here, Elias said, glancing at Lena. He's not alone. Amos's talk of a cartel meant others might be coming, and the lighthouse was no fortress. Lena nodded, clutching the painting, its canvas now fully exposed, Clara's face overlaid with faint lines, a map hidden in the brushstrokes. She was always cleverer than me. Elias's chest tightened, guilt and pride warring within him. They left Amos tied, his curses fading as they stepped into the dawn. The storm had broken, leaving a bruised sky and a sea that glittered like shattered glass. Havenport's docks were visible below, the Lobster Festival's banners fluttering in the breeze. Elias led Lena down the cliff path, his shoulder throbbing with every step. Her silence was heavy, and he knew why. Clara's sister. The truth he denied in the lighthouse still burned, but he was done running. At the docks, the festival was in full swing. Laughter, the sizzle of lobster boils, and the clink of beer mugs filled the air. Townsfolk bustled, their faces familiar yet distant to Elias, who'd kept them at arm's length for years. Lena hesitated, her eyes scanning the crowd. They'll find me, she whispered. The people Amos owes, they're after the map. Then we end this, Elias said, his voice firm. He guided her to his boat, the Clara's Hope, its hull battered but loyal. The painting went below deck, hidden in a locker. His plan was reckless. Sail to the map's coordinates, find the treasure, and use it to buy Lena's freedom. But first he needed to face his own truth. Lena, he said, turning to her as the boat rocked gently. Why didn't you tell me about Clara? His voice cracked, raw with years of buried pain. The festival's music drifted over, a bittersweet backdrop. She looked away, her fingers tracing the anchor rose tattoo. I was ashamed, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I ran with bad people, smugglers. Clara tried to save me, but I pushed her away. When she passed, I found her sketches, the map. I painted it to honor her, to find you. Her eyes met his, glistening. I didn't expect to care about you. Her words hit harder than Amos's bullet. Elias swallowed, his throat tight. I failed her, he said, the confession spilling out. I ignored her dreams, her secrets. If I'd listened, he trailed off, the weight of his flaw, his fear of truth, crushing him. But Lena's hand found his, cold but steady. You're listening now, she said softly. That's enough. The moment broke as shouts erupted from the docks. Two men, rough and out of place among the festival crowd, pushed through, their eyes locked on Elias's boat. Cartel. His heart raced. Hold on, he told Lena, starting the engine. The boat surged forward, cutting through the waves, but the men were already scrambling for a skiff. The chase was relentless. Elias pushed the Clara's hope to its limits, the engine screaming as they neared the map's coordinates, a rocky outcrop 10 miles offshore. Lena clutched the painting, her face set with determination. It's there, she said, pointing to a cave in the rocks, its mouth barely visible. Elias anchored the boat, his shoulders screaming as he helped Lena ashore. Inside the cave, the air was damp, the walls slick with algae. The painting's map led them to a crevice, where a metal box lay hidden, its lock rusted but intact. Elias pried it open, revealing gold coins and jewels, Clara's treasure, smuggled decades ago, worth enough to clear Amos's debts and more. Lena's eyes widened, but her smile was sad. She wanted this for us, she said. A second chance. The skiff's engine roared outside. Elias grabbed the box, his mind racing. We can't outrun them. But he had one card left, his boat. Get to the cave mouth, he told Lena, handing her the box. I'll draw them off. No, she protested, grabbing his arm. We do this together. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I lost Clara. I'm not losing you. The words were a vow, and her kiss, fierce, desperate, sealed it. He pulled away, running to the boat, his heart pounding. Elias gunned the engine, luring the skiff away. The Clara's hope was his home, his last tie to Clara, but he rammed it into the rocks, the hull splintering as he leaped ashore. The skiff hesitated, then turned back, spotting Lena with the treasure. Elias sprinted to her, tackling one man as she swung the box at the other, knocking him out. Together, they tied the men, their breaths ragged but triumphant. Back in Havenport, the festival was winding down, the community rallying to help. Elias turned the treasure over to the authorities, enough to clear Amos's debts and fund Lena's fresh start. His boat was gone, his savings thin, but the town's support, meals, offers of work, eased the sting. Lena stayed, her art studio opening beside the docks, her paintings free of secrets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias and Lena sat on the cliffs, the sea calm for once. Think we'll make it? She asked, her head on his shoulder. We've got a shot, he said, his smile real, no humor needed. Love had anchored them, flawed but unbroken, and Havenport's lights below promised second chances. Subscribe to the channel for more soul-stirring stories.